empty, 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 empty. So how seriously is Mondraker taking the downcountry category? For 2020, the company added 2 downcountry models that not only are made for the category, but they say downcountry right on them. For this year's field test, Mondraker sent us the top spec F-Podium DC RR model, which for $8,400 comes with a Shimano XTR group, Fox factory suspension front and rear with 120 millimeters of travel up front and 100 millimeters out back, DT Swiss XR 1501 aluminum wheels. The total weight comes out to 26.4 pounds without pedals, but with the Maxxis DHR and DHF Exo Plus control tires that we're using for every bike in this category. Out back, Mondraker uses its own version of a short dual-link suspension design that it calls Giro. And in this iteration, it has 100 millimeters of travel, and Mondraker specs a pretty firm compression tune from Fox on the DPS Evolve rear shock. So seeing as how this is a cross-country race bike that has been adapted for more general trail use, Mondraker has clearly made a priority to keep things pretty light. So the front and rear triangles are still carbon fiber, as you'd expect. The upper rocker link is also carbon fiber. But to keep things a little bit more durable, all the pivot axles are pretty large diameter, there are cartridge bearings all around, and everything seems pretty reasonably well sealed up. As we usually find with Mondraker frames, the frame is really low slung and there's a lot of standover clearance, and there's enough room inside the front triangle for even a large water bottle across the whole size range. And down below, thankfully, there's just a standard threaded bottom bracket. Overall, I think it looks pretty sweet, and the numbers make it look really promising. But that whole saying about books and covers, that whole thing exists for a reason, so we're gonna have to get a few chapters into this one before we can really draw any conclusions.
So James and I both weigh 155 pounds, so we ran the rear shock with 115 PSI with 10 clicks of rebound out from closed, and then on the fork we ran 68 PSI with 14 clicks of rebound.
So one thing to note is that 115 PSI is a lot lower than what Mondraker would normally recommend for riders our size. But we did that, we ran 35% sag to get, well, to try and get a little bit more travel out of it.
I really like the climbing position on this bike. That combination of the 75.1 degree seat tube angle with the 450 millimeter reach really gave you a planted feel over that front wheel.
Yeah, I thought the overall position was really good, but the rear suspension didn't really help me out on climbs as much as I would have liked. That Zero suspension system I know is already really efficient, but Mondraker fitted their rear shock with a pretty heavy-handed compression tune, so because it was so hard to get the back end to move, you didn't really get a whole lot of traction benefit on bumpier climbs.
Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no?
So if you look at the numbers, the 450 mil reach and that 66.8 degree head tube angle should make for a really good descender, and for the most part that's exactly how it is. I felt like I was in a really neutral position on the bike when we were going downhill, and I felt like I could really push the front end through corners instead of having to fight to always keep my weight back like on some of the shorter bikes. Specifically, the Top Fuel and the Mach 4 were both notably shorter, and we both felt like we had to work a lot harder on those bikes to keep going fast.
So I really liked the geometry as well. It was just the suspension felt a little bit unbalanced to me. There's nothing wrong with that 120 millimeter Fox 34 fork. It was just coupled with that suspension, the rear suspension that ramped up really quickly. It kind of felt like I was getting pitched forward, which made the head tube angle feel a little bit steeper than it needed to be.
Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no?
So the first half of our test loop has about 90 meters elevation of climbing, followed by a pretty tricky descent with some steep corners and rocks that allowed us to, in a short period of time, really get a good feeling for how the bike's capabilities were both on the climbs and the descents. And on the Mondraker, I actually had my fastest time both on the climb and on the descent.
And I actually set my third fastest time on this lap, which in the grand scheme of things was pretty good. It finished ahead of the pivot by a decent margin.
I feel like Mondraker kind of did things halfway here with the F-Podium. There's a stock dropper post, there's wider tires, there's a longer travel fork than the regular F-Podium, but there's other things that are missing.
Mondraker also fits the fork and the rear shock with a dual lockout, but the default position is locked, and both of us hit that by accident more than once and ended up with locked suspension when we definitely didn't want to have that.
We also really struggled with the house brand dropper post. There was a lot of friction to bring it up, and it was just a really slow return.
The front end of this bike is also really low to begin with, and then Mondraker makes it even lower by speccing a 50 mil stem, which is okay, but it's got a negative 5-degree rise on it, which is not so great because the stem clearly is not visually anyway meant to be flipped the other way. That's how we ran it, but it didn't look very good.
The geometry is so good. It feels as quick and nimble as the pivot and the top fuel on the climbs, but then on the descents is a lot more composed. In addition, the pedaling performance is great. It's a really fast climber and you feel really efficient. On the climbs, you also notice how light it is, and then just as a side note, it's really aesthetically pleasing. It's a great looking bike.
I have to say that I walked away from this Mondraker feeling more frustrated than I did about the other bikes, mainly because I could see the potential that the frame geometry had and the suspension design had, but Mondraker really kind of messed up a little bit by speccing that shock on there just because I felt it really hindered what performance there was on tap. The compression tune on the rear shock is just way too firm, and the suspension also just ramps up way too quickly out back. And although this bike was really light, it could have been lighter. I mean, for this price point, most of the other bikes that were in this range came with carbon wheels, and the Mondraker came with aluminum ones. To me, this bike for sure is more of a one-day marathon race. Even on a more technical course, as long as you're only riding it for a day, it'd be awesome. Anything more than that, I think it would beat you up too much. But I would love to try that bike with a different spec, and it sounds like I might actually be able to pretty soon.
So there you have it, the Mondraker F-Podium Downcountry RR. Stay tuned for more videos from the Pinkbike Field Test, including a Downcountry roundtable that compares all the different bikes.